Alright, what is up everybody, and welcome back to ICC, and welcome back to a new series. Welcome to the Gambit Files, where we'll take a look at some of the most interesting gambits there are in chess. As always, it is me, DGL, or Dill's Gambit Live, and welcome to Episode 1. This is a series I've wanted to do even before, even before this channel was created. And for the beginning of the series, I have chosen, well, I actually was debating which opening to choose first, but as you can see, for the first parts, I decided to cover the most famous gambit, arguably the King's Gambit. Now, before we begin, I would like to say, like all openings, there is a massive amount of information, and so this will probably go into parts. Part 1, being this video, will show just a very, very general overview of the opening. And of course, after that, 10 of the most famous King's Gambit games. And then Part 2 will be a bit more advanced, some more detailed stuff into the opening, some other points, and probably maybe 5 more games on top of that. And maybe another part in the future for...
Server announcement.
Thank you, server, for interrupting me. I forgot to turn that off. And yeah, possibly a part 3 in the future for anything else that I would like to add on. So yeah, and then we'll move on to other openings, other gambits. Okay, so before we go on, I want to mention there'll be a lot of links in the description for all the stuff I'll be covering. And during the games, when we go into the 10 most famous games, the names won't be completely there. Because ICC simply has a character limit, so instead of being, I don't know, Bobby Fischer, it might be Bobby Fish, you know, so, you know, you could probably figure it out, but just a heads up. Okay, so let's jump right into it. What do you think about when you think about the King's Gambit? I think about the Romantic era, sacrifices and risk. So why risk? Well, unlike its brother, the Queen's Gambit, it critically weakens an already weakened, diagonal, and yeah, it simply opens up the king a bit more. Okay, sorry about that. I forgot to go into analysis mode. So yeah, like I was saying, when you why risk? Well, you're weakening this diagonal and this diagonal, as well as weakening this square. And after all, it isn't called the King's Bishop Pawn Gambit. It's the King's Gambit. Quite often you are gambiting King's safety. For example, not being able to castle, say in the line E takes F4, Bishop C4, Queen H4 check, King F1. Or sometimes being able to castle, but having to castle with weakened squares around your king. But this is not to be taken so negatively. As with most gambits, there is compensation with, say, a quick and easy development. For example, here attacking the queen, central control, and yeah, of course, counter chances against the enemy king. Okay. Okay, now let's dive into the overview of the opening. We'll first look at black taking the pawn with E takes F4 here. Now the most popular move is knight to F3, developing a piece, controlling H4. However, there are other moves to look at, namely Bishop C4, which argues that white does not mind losing castling rights with Queen to H4 check, as white will get some developing moves against the queen, as we saw a minute ago. We'll take a closer look at this in part 2. But, okay, other than Bishop C4, other moves have been tried. Knight to C3, the Mason/Curie's Gambit. D4, the Vilsman Gambit. Oh, that's kind of a tongue twister. Or sometimes called the Steinitz Gambit. Bishop E2. And Queen F3, the Breyer, sometimes called Hungarian Gambit. Okay, but however, these are far less popular compared to Knight F3 and Bishop C4. Okay, moving on to Knight F3. Okay, after Knight F3, as seen here, black has many choices. G5, the classical variation, after which the main continuations are H4, the Paris attack, Bishop C4, is the other popular choice. However, knight c3, the quad attack, is also very possible. Okay, after h4, g4 is the principled reply when white can choose between knight g5 or knight e5. Of course, going to d4 or backwards does not make any sense and is not really in the spirit of the opening. Okay, considering knight g5, the Alger Gambit, so forgive me if I'm mispronouncing that, intending h6, knight takes f7. It's considered dubious by modern theory, but yeah, we'll take a closer look at part 2 of why this isn't so great. Moving on to knight to e5 is considered stronger. The Kazirski, oh man, these Russian names, man. Named after Lionel Kazirski. I know I'm butchering that name, right? Played by Steinitz and Spassky. Spassky, in fact, used this to beat Bobby Fischer, as we will see later in this video. Instead of h4, there is, as mentioned, bishop c4, which can lead to my to a personal favorite of mine, the Muzio Gambit. After the moves g4 and castles, white is giving up a piece, but his intentions are very, very clear, right? Yeah, just everything loading up, you know, and then d4 at some point. It should be mentioned, though, that black can avoid the Muzio Gambit by, after bishop c4, playing bishop g7. One sharp line, instead of avoiding the Muzio, is after we get into the Muzio Gambit, is queen to f6, e5, queen takes e5, and bishop takes
check.
f7 check. With all, which is a very crazy line, maybe not objectively great for white, but against an unwary opponent who maybe has never really seen this, it could be very dangerous, especially if accurate defense is not used. With all this said, the Muzio can be called into question in terms of soundness. However, black, of course, as said, must defend accurately. More in part 2. Instead of g5, which is the classical variation, there are, of course, alternatives we could quickly look at. h6, sometimes called the Becker defense, with the idea of playing g5 at some point, quite often just transposes into the classical variation. Knight f3, knight e7 is the Bosch or Osmolovsky defense. Another tongue twister.
Server announcement.
Thank you, server, for interrupting me again. Yeah, it's another favorite of mine. I've used in Blitz quite a bit, with ideas of supporting d5 or knight g6, covering the f4 pawn a little. Is quite an interesting line in itself. There's also knight f3, bishop e7, the Cunningham defense, and surprisingly this is not so rare. I actually get this semi-often when I used to play the King's Gambit quite often. It shows black's intent to stop white from castling. After the moves bishop c4, bishop
check.
h4 check, and king f1, and as in most or some King's Gambit lines, white loses castling rights, but okay, we lead to this typical crazy King's Gambit stuff. Instead of king f1, there's there's even the 3 pawns gambit here, with g3 takes, castles,
check,
takes on h2, and king h1. And yeah, this has actually been played in the 19th century, but yeah, I don't know anybody daring enough to play it nowadays, right? However, if we go back, after bishop c4, knight f6 is also equally common, and can lead to interesting play as well. Okay. After knight f3 here, there's also knight f6, the Shalop defense, often continuing e5, knight h5, with, wow, my voice just cracked there. But that's when you know you've been recording for so long, when your voice starts cracking, right? But as I was saying, knight h5 covering the f4 pawn, trying to hold on to it, but this is not normally so scary for white compared to when the knight is on g6. On h5, it's a bit offside. However, there is one interesting line here, continuing with d4, g5, h4, um, g4, knight g5. Yeah, pretty crazy, right? Knight g3, bishop c4, knight takes h1, bishop takes
Check.
e7, or f7, excuse me, king e7, and then knight c3, and there's already a main one threat with knight d5. Pretty crazy. But yeah, that's a very interesting line. But perhaps white can just avoid... white has alternatives, of course, and so does black. But this is one very cute line to take note of. Black probably has to play c6 here to stop the mate threat, and yeah, very crazy play from here on. Okay, going back after e4. Okay, let's get the King's Gambit back on. After knight f3, there is d5, which is the modern defense, playing for initiative and not material. One line being taking on d5 and bishop d6. Yeah, getting pieces out quickly. Of course, there are alternatives, and but yeah, this is also a very reliable and very popular defense to the King's Gambit. Okay, so after f4, takes on f4, knight to f3. There is also d6, the Fischer defense, which Fischer himself claimed was a high-class waiting move. One point is that after the moves d4, g5, h4, g4, white cannot play knight e5, obviously, because the pawn's covering it. And knight g5 is actually unsound because of f6, very strong. We'll take a closer look at this and the Fischer defense as a whole in part 2. Okay, going back to the King's Gambit here. Now we will take a look at lines where black does not play e takes f4 here. Starting out with, say, knight c6. An opening that if you watch my Chess Cube tournament videos, you know I quite often play this as a pre-move. Yeah, hoping for tricks. After knight f3, f5, hoping for something like knight takes e5. Okay, and we have this very classic trap. A very interesting line. We'll take a look at this again in part 2. Instead of knight c6, there's also d5, the Falkbeer counter gambit, which is very interesting and very popular, intending e takes d5, e4. Instead of e4, also e takes f4 should be noted as extremely solid as well. Okay, going back. So after e4, there's also the Nimzwich counter gambit, with starting from the Falkbeer counter gambit move order. d5, e takes d5, c6 is sort of a modern type of Falkbeer. One line here is knight c3, e takes f4, knight to f3, bishop d6, d4, knight to e7, takes on c6, and knight b takes e6, or c6, excuse me, leading to very interesting play. It's a very interesting opening as a whole. Alright, going back once again. Okay. Also possible is 2 bishop c5, which was recommended in a recent book I read. Is also very possible. White often seeks to remove the bishop with ideas of knight a4, like so. Of course, after black has played d6, trying to get the bishop off that line and continue with typical King's Gambit play. Okay, and after f4, we can take a quick look. f5 can be simply met by e takes f5, and white is already threatening queen to h5 check with devastating effects. So yeah, obviously that was a very, very vague, just a very general overview of the King's Gambit. Obviously, I could go into more detail and talk about some more things, but I think that's a very good, rough beginning overview of what can happen in the King's Gambit. Of course, as mentioned, we will go a bit more advanced, a bit more detailed in part 2 of the video. But okay, let's move on to the heart of this video and start show off the 10 most famous King's Gambit games, in my opinion, and according to a couple friends and chessgames.com. So anyway, first game right here is probably the most known King's Gambit game, and it would be foolish of me not to start this video off without showing this first. The game was played on June 21st, 1851, and was nicknamed the Immortal Game. The white player was none other than Andolf Andersen, born in 1818 and died in 1879, was a German GM and considered to be one of the best in the world in the 1850s and 1860s, and also known for playing the legendary Evergreen game. The black player himself was Lionel Kazurtsky. I know I'm butchering his last name, so you're gonna have to forgive me. But yeah, let's see how this went down. I'm going to mention for this particular game, I'm not going to go really deep into analysis simply because most people know this game, have looked at this game, and to be honest, this game has been analyzed to death. I mean, like, you could literally go to Wikipedia and find just commentary about this game. It's kind of funny, but okay, I'll show you some of the rough edges, of course. Anyway, let's jump right into it. As always, we see the King's Gambit as for this video. Alright, and the bishop c4 line, okay. Keep in mind this was in the 1850s.
Check.
So, these kinds of gambits were all the rage. Okay, and b5, which, isn't considered sound today. But okay, again, back in those times, people were all into giving away all their pawns and all their pieces and having a losing position. Okay, that's a bit harsh, but you know what I mean. Anyway, so just taking it, which is objectively best. Just grabbing the pawn, knight f6, knight f3, gaining a tempo on the queen. Queen h6 retreating. Okay, d3 is strengthening the center. Okay, now this sort of strange move at first, knight h5, but it has a point. Black is threatening, knight to g3 check. Keep in mind the rook is not defended. Oh, I drank too much soda, now I'm burping, that's great. Real professional, right? Anyway, so yeah, knight g3 is the threat here. So, knight h4. Now that there's, yeah, this file is blocked, there is no more threat of knight g3. Alright, queen g5. No attacking the bishop laterally. And knight f5, a very nice move, blocking the attack. c6 attacking the bishop. And g4, which is one of the first very nice moves. First of all, this pawn can't take en passant due to the pin. And okay, the queen doesn't have a check because the knight's defending it. So, the knight is under attack and had to move. Alright, the next very nice move, rook g1. Simply just ignoring the threat on the bishop, covering the pawn. But this sets up a very nice idea. Okay, so Lionel, I should just call him Lionel, that's much easier to say. Just grab the bishop and h4, which was the point. Now notice, this queen is not in the best place ever. Not a whole lot of squares available. Only g6 is available. h5 kicking it again. And now, after queen g5, only move to save the queen. Queen f3, very strong. Now, there's a threat here of bishop takes f4, and that is a queen trap. So, black had to make a very uncomfortable move here with knight g8, just to simply get the queen some retreat squares. Okay. White grabbed the pawn. Queen f6. Okay, on b2, but knight c3. Alright, bishop c5 attacking the rook, but white didn't care and just attacked the queen. Now you might say, isn't b2 hanging? And it is, and was grabbed. Okay, but bishop d6 offering many material, right? Offering 2 rooks. Yeah, just a crazy move. And the rook on g1 was captured. But now, Just e5, yeah, I don't care. Take my rooks.
check,
Queen takes a1 check. King e2. And knight a6. Okay, covering the c7 square. However,
check,
knight takes g7 check. King d8, and the very nice shot, the crown jewel of the game.
check,
Queen to f6 check, giving up the queen, because after the forced capture, there is main 1 with
checkmate,
bishop e7 checkmate. So yeah, obviously, very crazy game, very typical of the King's Gambit. I didn't go into much detail here. This is probably the least
friend
analyzed. Thank
arrived,
you, friend, for interrupting me. Yeah, this is probably the least analyzed game, simply because it's just so well known, but it would be very foolish of me not to put this game first, because it's obviously a very nice game. Alright, so let's move on to the next game. Alright, moving on to game 2. The white player is none other than Alexander Alekhine. So let's see how he fares with the King's Gambit, or Alekhine, or yeah, there's like 50 ways of saying it, right? Has anybody agreed on one name? Alekhine, Alekhine? I think Alekhine is Europe. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. Let's jump right into it. So obviously we go into a King's Gambit, and the bishop c5 line. Yeah, I mentioned this earlier. And d6 and knight c3. Okay, all very normal. Bishop c4. So both sides just getting their pieces out very normally. Okay. And bishop g4 pinning the knight, of course. Oops, there. And knight a4. I mentioned this earlier. Quite often, white tries to get rid of this bishop. Sometimes black plays a6 to try to tuck the bishop away. But okay, obviously this didn't happen in this game. So takes on f4, and we had the trade on c5, and grabs on f4, and already I really like white's position, okay? I play these kinds of, I really like having two pawns in the center against none. You know, there's no d and e pawns for black, and some of his pawns are doubled, and not to mention the bishop pair, so already a very nice position for white. Okay, so knight to h5, and bishop e3, and here we reach a Um, the very surprising move, and I'll put it on the board, is knight takes e5. And if you're in true King's Gambit mode at the moment, then you probably had this idea in your head, maybe. Okay, in the game, black took the queen. Okay, we'll look at that in a second, how the game continued. First, I want to mention queen to h4 check,
check,
which was my first thought, but it doesn't really lead to much. It just leads to a loss. Okay, g3 blocks, and knight takes g3. After which, bishop
check,
takes f7 check is very strong, and we'll take a look at some of the lines here. First, we can consider king to e7, after which check.
check,
And now there's two choices, king d8 or king f6. King f6, knight takes
check,
g4 check, king takes f7, queen to f3 check,
check,
and now knight to
check,
f5 check. So it's a counter check. Lots of checks going down. Um, King e2, and notice that there's a very nasty pin on the knight, and white should win material here. Alright, backing up to here, after bishop c5 check, the alternative is king d8, after which queen takes g4, queen takes g4 takes, and grabs the rook, can be met by king d2, and this knight will fall, and white will have 3 pieces for a rook, which is completely overwhelming. 2 bishops against a rook is very unpleasant, but if you throw on a knight on top of that, it's just game over. So this would be a very good, yeah, this would be very winning for white. Okay, going back. Okay, after knight takes g3, bishop takes
check,
f7. We can now consider briefly king to f8, but then we see
check,
bishop takes c5 check is very strong. Only move to block the only way to stop mate is queen to e7, and then we can just
check,
win the queen like so. And yeah, Obviously, very nice for white. 1 point being
check,
this one, picking up a knight. So, okay. Obviously, king to f8 isn't very viable. Okay, instead of king f8, we can consider king d8 immediately. But then, once again, we have queen takes g4, and this is very similar idea. However, there is one twist. It really doesn't matter where to put the king. d2 is what I have in my notes here. King to e7, attacking the bishop, which is one difference. However, there's a really strong move here for white in rook to f1. Now, um, the main point, if I can collect my thoughts a second, is that neither of these rooks can go to f8 due to the bishop c5 threat, which would pick up material. Okay, so and then again, white is just threatening to take on c5 with check. So black would have to play b6, and then
check,
bishop g5 check would remove the king away from the threat of these of the bishop, if I could speak English. And after the check, king d6, white could just grab the knight and have three pieces once again winning. Okay, so going on. So after knight takes d5, as mentioned, black grabbed the queen, probably seeing these lines, seeing that queen to h4 does not work. Okay, and now the point
check,
being bishop takes f7, and king e7 was played. Okay, again, king to f8,
check,
bishop takes c5. Losing the queen is not exactly what black wants, so um, king e7 is forced. There we go. Okay,
check,
bishop takes c5 check, king to f6,
check,
and now castle's long. I should mention, after bishop c5 check, that the only way to really stave off checkmate is just to give up the queen. You know, because the king cannot survive going forward, as we'll see. But okay, obviously this is winning for white as well. Anyway,
check,
after bishop takes c5 check, king to f6, white
check,
castled. And in the game, maybe related to time pressure, I don't know, black grabbed the knight, which just allowed
checkmate,
main one with knight, rook to f5 mate. However, you might be wondering what happens if king to g5. Well, there's actually a couple wins here, but the cleanest is bishop to
check,
e3 check, king to h4, and then the very strong rook to f5 with the threat of bishop f2, which will be mating. And the only real way to stave that off is queen d4, computer chess, and okay, it's only going to last for so long. um, we could put a sample line here, g5,
check,
but after the same idea,
checkmate,
black eventually gets mated anyways. So a very nice game here by Alekine, however you want to say it, after the moves.
checkmate,
Here was the final position, and yeah, again, very nice game by Alekine. Let's move on to the next game. Okay, moving on to game 3. The white player is the legend Paul Morphy himself against, once again, Andolf Andersson. Okay, so let's see how the game kicked off. We quickly get a King's Gambit on the board. And g5, the classical. h4. Okay, so generally considered maybe one of the main lines of the King's Gambit. Knight f6. Knight takes g4. Okay. And d3, kicking the knight away. Knight to g3, very crazy line. It should be noted that this was just a casual game between these two players, just a friendly game, but it does illustrate how quickly things can go wrong. I'll leave it at that. Knight takes h1,
check,
and queen to e2 check, and black has two ways of meeting it. He played queen to e7. Bishop e7 is not quite as good due
check,
to
checkmate,
this idea. So, queen to e7,
check,
knight to f6 check, king to d8,
check,
and we have this
check,
very cute combination. Okay, so white wins a queen, but obviously black has quite a few pieces for it, so It's definitely not over or anything. Okay, queen to g4. Um, d6, attacking the queen. And the queen just went to f4, tickling the f pawn a bit. Rook to g8, takes on f7.
Check.
And then, okay, the king was forced to move, and rook e8. Okay, so maybe black is getting maybe a little coordination. He's a little underdeveloped, but, okay. Alright. So after knight a3, black is far from completely busted. He's probably doing alright. I mean, okay, it's obviously not the most simple position ever, but he's far from losing directly. However, here he should probably secure his pieces with bishop g5 check,
Check.
king to c3, knight to g3, get his pieces back into play. Stuff like h6, and yeah, you can start thinking about knight to f5 because it's covered by the bishop, etc. Getting your pieces back and securing them. However, after knight a3, black played knight to a6, which ran right into queen to h5, and okay, all of a sudden you start seeing that a lot of these pieces are on the h-file, and it's pretty hard to save them all. In fact, you can't. But okay, it's still interesting. Black still has some material. And queen takes h1 here. Okay, so here's probably the interesting point of the game. Black has an interesting move here with bishop to g5 check. Basically forcing king to c3. If king to d1, bishop g4 check, bishop e2 is the only move, and you don't want this. Simply put, very ugly. Okay, so once again, after check, king to c3 is forced, basically. After which a possible line could be bishop e6, intending rook c8, b3, check anyway, king b2, and bishop f6 is a very possible line, followed by d4. It's very important to play d4. If you don't, let's say you play king b1 immediately. This is losing, actually, to bishop g4, amazingly. When suddenly, rook to e1 checkmate is very hard to stop. And, okay, bishop e2 is the only move to get some cover on the back rank. But, of course, this could be just taken. And, all of a sudden it's black winning after rook takes e2. So going back, after king b2, check, it's important to play d4 here first, as after d4, bishop takes d4, king b1. After bishop g4, it's not as deadly because the bishop has, these squares available, besides a5. So yeah, you could probably just take the knight even, or bishop d3, whichever you choose. And okay, white's hanging on. Very interesting stuff. So after say king b1, black should probably just take the rook. And okay, it's still a game going on here. It's definitely still a fight. But okay, this is what should have probably happened. Instead, after queen takes h1, black played takes on b2, which was very nicely answered by queen to h4 check, king to d7. There's alternatives, but they all lead to the same thing. Rook to b1 takes on a3, and the check, and black resigned as white will grab the bishop and just has a material lead and is consolidating his advantage. So obviously a disappointing game for Adolf. Oh, I can't even say his name all of a sudden. I just blanked. Andolf Anderson. And obviously a good game for Paul Morphy. Again, this is just a friendly game between the two of them, but obviously it shows the craziness and the dangers that lie in the King's Gambit. Moving on to Game 4. Okay, moving on to Game 4 is a legendary game which features one of the deepest sacrifices ever. The game was played in the USSR Championship in 1960. The white player was Boris Spassky, and the black player was David Bronstein. Alright, so let's jump right into it. So we get the King's Gambit on the board, and d5, the modern variation. And bishop d6, this was mentioned earlier in the video as a possible line. Quite reliable. Okay, so we get this position on the board. Castles, bishop d3, all very normal. h6, and knight e4. And you might think, hold on, isn't d5 hanging? And it is. But white had a very nice idea here.
Friend departed.
Thank you, friend, for interrupting me. White had a very nice idea here with c4. Now, of course, knight to b6 or knight to e7 are both meant by c5. Knight to f6 can be just meant by this trade. So, the point I'm making here is that after c4, there's only really one move. I mean, you could maybe try to make knight f6 work, I don't know. But the more interesting move is knight to e3 as was played in the game. Okay, so obviously this is forced, and we have this trade. c5, hitting the bishop, which dropped back. Bishop c2, okay, obviously with this idea in mind. Rook to e8, and queen to d3. Now, alright, we're getting to the heart of the game. Let's say black plays a nothing move, something that doesn't alternate or change the position that dramatically. I don't know, let's say a6. Okay, that doesn't really do a whole lot. After the said nothing move, knight d6 is very strong. What a shocker, right? A very nice move, a very nice concept. One line being, bishop takes d6,
Check.
queen to h7 check, king to f8,
Check.
and we have this position. Quite remarkable. And if black tries to save material now with bishop f4, then knight to h4 is very strong. One sample line, and this is just one possible move, is rook g8, but this move even leads to a checkmate with knight to
Check.
g6. King e6
Check.
takes on f4, king e7,
Check.
d5,
Checkmate.
and we have this idea. Going back after rook g8,
Check.
if the king goes back, then there's this idea. There we go. After knight f8,
Check.
here, c6,
Check. Check.
takes on f8,
Check. Checkmate.
and we have this idea. Okay, so going back here, so if it was white's move, knight d6 would be a very nice idea. So how did black respond? He played e2, very interesting, trying to basically deflect the queen away from this battery. But knight d6 anyways. And yeah, described as one of the most deepest sacrifices this side of the Evergreen game by Andrew Soltis. However, there is quite a bit of controversy about whether this is actually a very good move. Some claiming black can draw with computer-like moves, such as bishop takes d6, queen to h7 check, king f8, c takes d6, takes on f1, rook takes f1, etc., etc. I don't know. This is so crazy. Now, some of these arguments might be very well true. However, it does not take away the pizzazz of knight to d6. And nor did Bronstein find his way out of the complications, which is very understandable considering, you know, this is very complicated. Now, putting aside the argument whether knight d6 was a very good move or, you know, whatever, some have demonstrated other possible improvements before knight to d6. So let's quickly take a look. The main one being rook to f2. This has also sparked a little controversy. But, okay, the move I want to show mainly while doing some research for this video, I came across someone presenting their analysis about the move queen takes e2 here, which apparently wins based on their analysis. I will share that with you now. I want you to note, once again, this is not my analysis. All credit goes to Dr. Mall on chessgames.com. I did more or less check his analysis to confirm, what he showed, and it looks pretty good. And yeah, so without further ado, this is Dr. Mall's analysis, and I quote, "Now, the very strong move that was not played. As I stated before, if black does manage to amazingly find each surviving move, the sequence is queen takes e2, knight to f8, rook a to d1, bishop e6, exclamation point, knight to e5, f6, d5, bishop c8, exclamation point, bishop b3, f takes e5,
Check.
d6, bishop to e6, d7, king to h8, exclamation point, takes, bishop to d5, queen to g6, and from here there are probably multiple ways for white to win. Example, queen to e3, or maybe even rook to d2, or bishop takes b7. With help from Houdini to make sure black plays his best, here is one example. Queen to c4, rook to e8, king to h1, a5, rook d to e1, bishop h4, rook to e3, king to h7, bishop takes e6, knight takes e6, g3, bishop e7, queen to d5, knight to g5, rook fe1, knight takes e4, rook takes e4, rook to d8, queen takes b7, bishop takes c5, rook takes e5, bishop d4, rook to e6, queen to f5, queen to g2, c5, b3, rook to f8, rook 6 to e4, queen to g6, rook to f4, rook to d8, queen to b7, bishop c3, rook to e2, queen to d3, queen to
Check.
e4 check,
Check.
takes, rook f takes e4, bishop d4, rook to e8, rook to d6, rook to a8, bishop c3, h4, king g6, king to g2. From here, black does not really have anything constructive to do. Just sit and wait and to see how white will win. I will use the moves Houdini gives as marginally best among several equivalent ones. White makes progress in similar fashion no matter what anyway. Rook to d1, g4, rook to d4, king to f3, rook to d1, rook to
Check.
e6 check, king to f7, rook to c6, rook to
Check.
d3 check, king to e2, rook to d2 check, king to e3, rook to d7, exclamation point, h5, exclamation point, king to e7, rook a to c8, and at this point, black is totally lost. I leave it to the reader to enjoy the win of their choice. Back to the question of this game that Soltis misled so many on. Given the choice between a solid, probably winning move versus a sack that is easily refuted for a draw, which would you choose? To me, the answer to this was, and still is, obvious. This game got a lot of drama attached to it, even was prized, like the Evergreen game, where White also had a good game but played a sack that should have drawn. This game is similar, so I saw the connection between the two. Spassky played a brilliant game indeed up until move 15. He had a big advantage that, as I showed, was actually winning. If he had played the best move, he probably would have won by force. Instead, he gambled on a sack that should have drawn. This does not exemplify great chess, it exemplifies great luck. End quote. Oh boy. It's not easy to read that. Anyway, so yeah, obviously very complicated stuff. Again, that was Dr. Mall that I was quoting right there from chessgames.com. Link in the description if you want to go check it out for yourself. Again, if you're interested, I encourage you to investigate this further. So yeah, very interesting stuff. Very well done for the analysis. That was quite a bit. But moving back, going back a long ways, we went pretty deep there. Returning to the main line of the game, Black, in a complicated position, did not survive much longer. Let's see how it finished up. So again, knight to d6 was played. At knight to f8, question mark, yeah, dubious, allowing. Knight takes f7, which is just basically lights out, right? That's the best way to describe it. Let's see what was played.
Check.
Takes on f1. If king takes here, then bishop
Check.
b3 check, queen to d5,
Check.
bishop takes d5, and knight to g5,
Check.
double check, king to g8, takes
Check.
here, king to h8, takes
Check.
here, takes. It doesn't really matter which way you recapture.
Checkmate.
And mate. Okay, so obviously, king takes f7 is not what you want.
Check.
So black grabbed the rook. We had there. Bishop f5, and you could just grab it. Queen to d7, queen to f4, and it's pretty simple from here on out. Knight to e5 was a nice shot. Bishop b3, yeah, just lining up against the king. There's no way you'll survive this.
Check. Check.
After a few more moves, here in fact, black did resign. What a complicated game, right? Probably one of the most complicated ever. Yeah, very crazy, but a very enjoyable game. I always liked the controversy over the whole knight d6, whether it was a good move. I always think it's just a great move simply because, there's so much pizzazz behind it. It takes, in a USSR championship too, crazy. So definitely GG there. And then let's move on to Game 5. Okay, so moving on to Game 5. This game was played in Mar del Plata in 1960. The white player once again is Boris Spassky, and black is none other than Bobby Fischer. Alright, so this is the first meeting of these two players that I can, at least that I found. Little did they know that in 12 years from the point of this game being played, they would be dueling it out for the World Chess Championship. Alright, so let's jump right into it. Alright, we have the King's Gambit, of course. Okay, the h4 line 95, yep. All very normal. d4 and d6. Okay. All of this is, of course, known stuff. Knight d3 takes on e4. Alright, knight to c3. And we get a very typical, I'm just speeding through the moves, a very typical messy King's Gambit. Okay, takes on d4 castles, yeah. Okay, knight to c6, getting pieces out, and bishop takes g4. Obviously very, very messy. I mean, yeah. Okay, castles getting off the e-file, of course, makes a lot of sense. We have the trade on c8, queen to g4. I'm just quickly jumping ahead to the critical point. Takes on c3. Okay, so getting material. Okay, and then king to h8, which is a very good idea. Preparing rook to g8, which will be very useful on the g file. King to h1, rook to g8. and takes on d6, not fearing anything. Bishop f8.
check,
Um, White gave the check.
check,
And rook to g7. Takes on f5.
check,
Queen takes h4. I just want to get to the critical point. Rook to f2, defending the mate threat. Pretty important. Rook to e4, attacking the queen. Queen to g5. Queen to d4. And here perhaps black should play b6, securing the queenside pawns. Yeah. However, instead of b6, rook to f8 was played, and suddenly white gets an advantage. And here's the critical point, with rook to e5. Very nice. All right, so keep in mind, okay, rook to d8, attacking the, the queen, but queen to e4, very strong and winning. Yeah, saving the queen from the rook threat and keeping the threat on the black queen and adding more pressure to the bishop. Black is completely overloaded, as after queen to h4, rook to f4, black had to resign right here because there's no way the queen can't go to either of these squares. The rooks defend them very nicely. And if the queen goes anywhere else, the e7 bishop is falling. So no way to save the queen and the bishop. So yeah, black will be losing a piece. So yeah, obviously not the funnest or brightest game from Fischer, but yeah, okay. So yeah, obviously a very good game, although a very good game by Boris Spassky is what I'm trying to say. Okay, so yeah, obviously not a whole lot of analysis there. I think we could use it after that crazy last game. And okay, let's move on to game 6. Okay, moving on to game 6. This game was played in the USSR Championship. USSR Championship in 1955. Once again, the white player is Boris Spassky, who seems to be in a lot of these games. Wasn't intended, but okay. And the black player is Yuri Averuk, sorry. I need to work on my Russian last names, right? You know who I'm talking about. Okay. Alright, so let's jump right into it. Whoa, not that far. Wrong button. Okay. So we got the King's Gambit and the 97 line. Okay. Which is one of my favorites, of course. As we'll see, d5 is the point. I can quickly mention I have played knight to g6 here. It's also interesting. Anyway, let's stick to the main game. Castles, bishop e7, so all very normal. Knight to c3, knight to e5, occupying the square. Bishop e6 and bishop takes f4, getting the pawn. Of course, it should be noted that the knight is covering the bishop. So if knight takes f4, rook takes f4, the bishop is safely protected, again, by the knight. And now the rook can be used as an attacking piece along, you know, these ideas. Okay, of course not right now, but in the future. But that wasn't played. f6 was played. Trying to remove the defender of the c4 bishop, forcing bishop takes d5, takes back, knight d3. Okay. Bishop f7, okay. The f7 square seems very nice for the bishop. Queen to g4, king to h8. And the very surprising bishop takes b8, but it's actually a very good move. It's kind of weird giving up the bishop pair, and it's in fact 2 bishops versus 2 knights at the moment. But we will see that it's not all so doom and gloom. It's actually very nice for white, very pleasant. These bishops aren't really doing a whole lot at the moment, and the knights have very easy ideas to activate. Rook to e8, and as we'll see, there's now a very nice tactical idea with knight to e5. Very nice, very, very nice. Okay, if we could briefly consider black played rook to f8 back, We could quickly consider if taking the knight, rook takes f7. Okay, we're obviously threatening mate. Bishop f6, and then rook here. And okay, with the idea of, yeah, simply snatching that bishop up. Queen c8. We can also briefly consider rook to g8. And then queen to h5, threatening once again to take the bishop. So, yeah, this is very strong. Bishop to g5 and takes on e5 is a very good position for white indeed. Okay, so going back after bishop f6 here, queen c8. Oh, oops. Here. Alright, so then the trade is objectively best. And then knight takes d5. And white has a very easy game. Probably, yeah, okay, everyone would take white here with the material, but okay. So obviously black didn't want that, and he just played rook to f8. Maybe he should have gone for that even, but yeah, it's hard to say.
Check.
White grabbed the bishop, takes, and queen to e6. Very strong, just occupying that weak light square. King to g8, and knight takes d5. It becomes, yeah, it's just crashing through now. Bishop f8, rook to e4, bishop d6, c4. I mean, just look at this knight, right? And these all these pieces and the nice pawns, just absolutely brutal. b6, trying to stop c5, but b4 is going to make sure c5 happens. Queen to f8, c5 as planned, takes, and black gave up the piece just to get rid of the pawns. Very understandable. Those pawns were very dangerous.
Check.
Okay. And rook d8.
Check.
Knight to e7 check. King to f8. Knight to c6. Queen to b5, excuse me. And rook fe1. And black did resign here. He just gave up as, yeah, the threats of knight takes d8. By the way, the rook moved because it was being attacked. But anyway, yeah, black resigned due to the rook hanging and the threat of queen to e8. For example, a6 or... oops, not there. Yeah, this doesn't work because of the queen hanging. And as mentioned, if the other threat being
Check.
queen to e8 with this idea.
Checkmate.
So, in point, you can't stop the rook threat or the mate threat. So black just gave up right here. Understandable. Very nice game by Spassky. Okay, let's move on to Game 7. Okay, moving on to Game 7. This was a game played in 1963 at the Moscow, it looks like, Mathematics Institute. The white player was David Bronstein, and the black player was a computer called M20. David Bronstein had an interest in computers and sometimes played games against them back even in 1960s. Note again, this was played in 1963, and the computers are nothing like they are now. You know, computers nowadays can reach ratings of 3100 or whatever. Not the case back in the day, as we'll see. Anyway, let's jump right into it. So we get the King's Gambit quickly, and this knight f6 line, which probably isn't so great. And g5, being very greedy, trying to hold on to the pawn. That's one thing that hasn't changed with computers. They are very greedy things. They want material. And knight to e3, very kind of yeah, no return move. Queen to e2 and takes on f1. And knight to e4, which is a good move. Black should now probably play bishop e7 with the idea of
Check.
needing knight to f6 check, as here, with bishop
Check.
takes, and knight e3. Bishop takes e3 and the very strong castles, getting the king into somewhat safety. Of course not f takes e3,
Check.
queen takes e3, and this line. And yeah, this is absolutely crushing. Obviously white is threatening this idea. And say rook to g8.
Check.
We have this check. And this is just no fun for black whatsoever. Like, I mean, it's just absolutely brutal. One follow-up could be just castles, d6, rook here, and you're never going to survive this, simply put. Okay, so, yeah, obviously, going back, so obviously this is something black wants to avoid. So after bishop takes e3, castles, as mentioned, is very strong, after which white should probably take on g5 with this idea. Oops. Um, so yeah, after knight takes g5, queen takes f6 is force, trying to get some defense going. Knight to e4, queen to f5, bishop f2, and now d5. Of course not rook to e8, which would be met by
Check.
knight to f6, which would win material. So d5, and knight to c3, and black is still in the game, of course. Okay, so this is, I mean, it's obviously not very pleasant. White has a lead in development, and probably just generally a nicer position, but black is still in the game, so he probably should have gone for something like this. However, after knight e4, um, after knight e4, black did not play bishop e7, and played knight e3.
Check.
After knight f6 check, which, yeah, king to e7, okay, not the nicest move, not the move you really want to play, but okay. And here, as you can see, white played bishop d2. White had, yeah, a much cleaner win, you could say, a much simpler win, with just grabbing the knight. I mean, just take the piece. And, oops, not takes there. Takes on g5 now. And now white's idea is queen to h5. You could take a look at knight to c6 is met by this, and it's just devastation. Or probably the best is bishop h6, but even this is, yeah, not very pleasant. Met by knight takes f7.
Check.
And yeah, if you go here, there's probably a lot of moves. Queen g4, castles. You know, it's black's king is just so open. Even knight to g4 can be considered there. But okay. And if king to e7, you could just grab the piece. But yeah, going back, as mentioned, bishop takes e3 was not played. Bishop d2 was played, which allowed
Check.
knight takes c2 with check, and that was played. King to f2, and here, right here, is a moment for black to get some safety for his king. It's obviously very needed, right? The king is not looking very pretty on e7, so bishop g7 was, you know, the chance to get the king in escape square. You know, some cover. Okay. However, the computer, of course, was very greedy and took the rook. Now,
Check.
after knight d5 check, there's actually one move that loses and one move that draws, if you can believe that. Yeah, I mean, black, okay. Although black's play has been rather sloppy, probably not very good, he has been taking a lot of material throughout these moves. He has no pieces out besides the knight on a1, and but okay, he's up material. You know, you could that's one fact. So, however, okay, the move that draws is the most logical one, and that's king e8, and there's nothing better, at least that I could find with, you know, my computer and stuff, than just repeating the position, you know, with this perpetual idea. However, as you could probably guess, the computer did not play king to e8, and played king to e6, and yeah. Basically running, you know, down a street with a sword at a guy with a machine gun. You know, you're not gonna, you know, you know, you can't run towards the enemy like that. You know what I mean? Okay. But okay. After king to e6, that allowed a very nice finish. With queen to c4, threatening literally 5 billion discoveries, right? b5.
Check.
Takes on g5 with check.
Check.
Takes on c7. I'm not going to do much analysis here. You know, it's very clear cut. You can, of course, take a look at this. It's very well played.
Check.
Knight to d5 check. King to e6 back.
Check. Check.
And yeah, the cleanup crew comes in.
Check.
Takes on c8.
Check. 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 Checkmate.
And queen to e8, checkmate. Very nice. What a game. Yeah, okay, obviously you won't see computers playing like that nowadays, but very GG. Very nice game, and long live the human race. Okay, on to game 8. Okay, moving on to game 8. This game was played in the U.S. Championship in 1963. Bobby Fischer had the white pieces, and his opponent was Larry Evans. Alright, so let's jump right into it.
Check.
The bishop c4 line and queen to h4 check. Okay. d6, knight to c3. Alright, so just very simple development. Queen e7, which actually seems a bit strange, blocking the square for the bishop and the knight. You know, obviously these are, you know, potential places for pieces, but however, there's an idea behind it, as we'll see very quickly. d4. Okay, we had the trade. g5. e5. So black's idea here is to put the bishop on g7 and maybe use the h6 square to get the knight into the game. d5, queen dropped back, knight e2, knight b4. Okay, so it's all very logical, very logical play. c3 kicking the knight, and h4 trying to yeah, weaken this pawn chain, make the f pawn a bit looser. g4, okay. Knight h2 and h5. Also very interesting is f3 here. One line being queen takes h4, f takes g4, f6, queen d3, knight to e7 takes on f6, queen takes f6,
Check.
and knight to f3 blocking with unclear play. Okay, white's king is obviously very loose, but maybe he has some activity, you know, very unclear. But okay, that's just an interesting point. But okay, after h5, black has a very solid position. I rather like h5, to be honest, just very simple play. Okay, so knight takes f4, and queen takes h4, which isn't very good, but it isn't obvious why. A safer move, instead of here, probably would just be king to b8, getting the king a bit safer, or maybe trying to develop a piece. Okay, but black grabbed the pawn, and the very strong king to g1, and okay, these pieces aren't undefended anymore. And yeah, that's obviously very important. Knight to h6. Okay. And knight to f1. Black's reply is forced, as queen to g5 would run into the simple knight to e6. So, going back, black had to play queen to e7. Takes on h5, rook to g8, knight to g3, making sure this pawn isn't going anywhere. Rook to g6, and knight to g3, or not to g3, knight to f4. Knight to g3 was last move. So knight to f4, obviously attacking the rook. Okay. Okay, so the rook had to move. And bishop e3, and white has consolidated and just stands much better. Obviously, this isn't a direct mating attack, but white has, you know, just a very pleasant position here. Knight to c7, trying to get the knight back into the game. Okay. Queen to d2, rook to g8, and knight f to e2. And amazingly, the knight on h6 has no squares, and no support can be given to it. So yeah, after some more moves, f6 takes, the knight was grabbed, and white is a piece up. The game continued for a little bit. but in the end, it really didn't matter.
Check. Check.
And after the rooks are traded, white is just a healthy piece up, and yeah, there's not much more point. So black resigned. A very good game by Fisher. So yeah, let's move on to... Okay, moving on to game 9. Okay, so this game was played in London, England. Yeah, where else is there a London? I think there's some cities actually called London and other places. I don't know. Anyway, yeah, London, England in 1834. I don't really know these players, so yeah. Anyway, but it's a pretty well-known game, at least for King's Gambits. Anyway, okay, g5 and the bishop c4 line, and g4. Okay, now white played knight c3. Castles would actually lead to the Museo Gambit, which was mentioned in the beginning of the video. Anyway, sticking to the game, knight c3. I mean, honestly, if you're going to give up a piece on f3, I think you should just play castles and go into the Museo. I mean, there's a chance this might transpose, but I don't know. I feel like getting the rook on the f-file quickly if you're going to sack a piece is the way to go. But okay, it worked out in the end anyway. Bishop h6, d4, knight c6, castles, and now black got greedy and played knight takes d4, which actually leads to trouble. Better moves, or better alternatives, probably would be queen f6 or even queen to g5. Both are, yeah, slightly, yeah, probably slightly better. Keeping an eye on the f-pawn and not getting too greedy. But knight takes d4 was played, and
Check.
yeah. This is why it's a bit iffy, as we'll see. King takes on f7. Okay, you have to take the piece.
Check.
And queen h5. And, okay, there's a lot of alternatives here. I think king f6 is probably one of the, yeah, unique ones. After which bishop takes f4. King to g7. Bishop
Check.
e5 check. Knight f6. It just collapses like that. Black actually has to give up the queen.
Check.
And, yeah.
Check.
We could quickly follow it up just to go to the end with it. Queen
Check.
to e5 check. King to g8.
Check.
Yeah. And,
Check.
the other rook comes into the game with devastating
Check.
effect.
Check.
Black has to give up some pieces to stave off the mate,
Check.
right? In true computer style. But in the end,
Checkmate.
this nice checkmate happens anyway. But I'm going back to the position. If the king goes anywhere else, really, I mean, you know, even here as in the main game, yeah, it all just explodes with bishop takes f4. And, yeah, it just completely busts open. But, okay, following the game, king g7 was chosen. And, okay. Bishop takes f4 as planned. Alright, so we have the trade. It should be noted that rook to f7 checkmate is threatened. Always good to note the main ones. Knight to f6.
Check.
And, yeah, white just piled up on the f-file, and this knight is going down. Okay, king to e8. White grabbed the piece and mopped up. Queen to c5. Okay, maybe trying to get some hope of some sort of counterplay against the king, but the king just scooted over and said, what are you going to do now? And black said, I want to lose material with a nice shot. I think it's important to note, briefly, after queen c5, white could have also forced mate here. Although it's very hard to see, it should be noted that knight takes c7
Check.
is actually a forced win. It's already winning, but this just wins on the spot, really. Queen takes c7, queen
Check.
to h5, king to d8.
Check.
We have this trade
Check.
here. And, yeah, rook to
Check.
f7. If the king goes here, here, there's queen to d5. So king to e8. And then,
Check.
yeah, takes on h7. d8, and game over follows
Check.
with this idea.
Checkmate.
Okay, but going back to here, so yeah, knight takes c7 was a forced win, but yeah, Black's position is already extremely busted, so that wasn't even needed. Here, as noted, Black opted or wanted to lose material. I'm kidding, by the way, he just blundered here. But yeah, there's a very nice tactic that wins major material, and if you want, you can pause the video and try to find it on your own. It's not necessarily a forced mate, but it wins a good amount of material and just basically the game as a whole. So pause now if you want to try to solve it. Okay, so the move is
Check.
rook takes e6. Okay, it's probably one that you considered, I would assume. And the point being that after you take the rook, as in the game,
Check.
knight to f6 happens, and we're at the end of the game because Black resigned here as the king is in check, and the queen is, yeah, hanging next move as soon as the king gets out of it. So yeah, a very nice game, played in London, and yeah, let's move on to the 10th and final game of this video. Okay, so we're on the 10th and final game of this video. This game was played in 1866. The white player is William Steinitz, and the black player was Adolf Anderson. Okay, so let's jump right into it. So we have the King's Gambit, of course. G5 once again, G4, and knight to E5. Once again, once again, castling would lead to the Museo Gambit, which, okay. But once again, knight to E5 was played in the game. We saw knight to C3 in the last game. Okay, but anyway, knight to E5,
Check.
queen to H4 check, king to F1, white losing castling rights, which is quite typical, as we've seen. D4 getting a pawn in the center. Alright, kicking the knight away, and F3. G3 was played,
Check.
and queen to H3 check. While looking at the comments on chessgames.com, some people were pointing out that maybe queen to, yeah, to H3 check, this move right here, did not accomplish much, didn't really do much in the end. So people were considering just dropping it back. But okay, queen to H3 was played in the game. King to E1, only move. Okay, and the queen dropped back, so sort of a loss of tempo, but you could argue that black forced the king more into the center. I don't know. It's very interesting, though. I mean, king, yeah. But anyway, white got his piece out, knight to c3. I rather like white's center, okay, but but black has pawns, you know, right up the, yeah, gut, so to say. Okay, so c6 seems like a very natural move. Controlling these squares, bishop d2, queen to g6, and knight to f4. Um, I guess it's funny to point out that white cannot castle, which I'm sure he would actually like to do if it was a legal move. But the king has moved, you know, here, and then eventually got its way back. So castling isn't an option. Okay. Knight to f4, attacking the queen. The queen reacted. Bishop e3, knight d7, king f2, and yeah, the somewhat strange knight g8. Perhaps setting up the pieces for the next game. I don't know. Although this runs into trouble, all joking aside, I do understand, you know, black trying to reroute his knight, because it obviously wasn't doing so much on h6 on the side of the board. Okay, but e5, very nice. When your opponent's king is in the middle of the board and, you know, his pieces or your opponent's pieces are lacking in development, opening up the position, of course, makes a lot of sense. So queen to e7. Okay, obviously black doesn't want to take and open it up. e6, yeah, just right up the gut. Um, it's interesting to point out, one other option instead we could quickly look. Of course, black, like I said, doesn't want to take it, but we could briefly look. Takes, knight takes e5, which is more or less a piece sacrifice because of bishop to d4, bishop e6, trying to get pieces out, rook e1, castles, knight takes e6, f takes e6, rook takes e5, very crazy line, c5 now, bishop takes
check,
e6 check, with very unclear play, although probably better for white, probably. Very careful with the word choice there, very, very complicated, but one line could be king to b8 here, queen to, um, now knight to d5, sorry, and now queen to h6, bishop takes g4, c takes d4, getting some material back, and then the very nice, yeah, you could take your pick, rook to h5 or rook to f5, both seem to be good, but rook to f5 or rook to h5, very nice position for white. Very unclear though, there's a lot of different sub-variations here, but yeah, very interesting. Okay, going back after here, so queen e7 was played and e6, and taking on, yeah, black just took it. Of course, you don't want to allow white to take. That's very clear. And, okay, so taking is probably forced. And then knight takes e6. So obviously, white, you know, has a lead in development. Yeah, these pawns are pretty strong, but other than that, black really doesn't have anything going for him, it looks like. Okay. Knight to f6, and bishop f4, very nice. Instead of that, rook to e1 was also very nice in this position. One point being that d5 actually runs into knight
check,
to c7 check, with queen takes c7 being met
check,
by bishop f4. This is just another very nice move, rook to e1. Of course, what was played is also very good, being bishop f4. Okay, obviously rook to e1 next move is the idea. Okay, so takes, and king to d8. Okay, again, you can't take the bishop because of rook e1, winning material. Okay, king to d8, getting off the file, but rook to e1 anyway, queen to g7. And just look at these bishops, and even the rook, very nicely positioned, while black is, yeah, the knights are stepping on each other's toes, and, yeah, the bishop doesn't have great prospects, and the rook is just trapped in the corner, not getting out into the game. Alright, d5, very, enterprising. Okay, c5 is the response. Knight to b5, and then knight to e8. Okay, obviously black is playing very serious defense here, right? Okay, knight to f6.
check,
White gave the check, b6, dropped back. It's all very concrete play. Queen to b7, trying to support the defense on the queen side. Bishop g5, bishop e7. Yeah, very nice play. Okay. Yeah. Here, after queen to e7, um, yeah, white had the opportunity to play rook to e6 and try to immediately double. Um, yeah, here are some lines we could briefly look at. a6, yeah, is not even a pin. Yeah, is not reacting because black can't take. So that doesn't change the position. White will just double. Rook to f8 can be met by bishop takes e8 when all recaptures lose material in some way. Yeah, absolutely crazy white doubling instead of rook f8. Yeah, we can even look if you want rook to f8. Yeah, they're all losing. So after here, rook takes is met by bishop takes, winning material. Actually, because of this in the end, I should point out, instead of rook takes, there's also queen takes and then doubling, and it just completely explodes, simply put. And king takes, doubling again is crazy. And knight takes, bishop
check,
takes, and it's all going downhill. Okay, so going back, um, yeah, so after rook to e6, black could have been in a knot and about to experience a world of pain and doubling on the e-file. However, this wasn't played. It was just an alternative. Very interesting, though, also strong. The move that was played is certainly not bad, though, and leads to something very similar. I like rook to e6, and, okay, honestly, so does the computer. Yeah, I'm willing to admit it. But yeah, okay, the move played was bishop takes immediately. So, yeah. So instead of rook takes, we could briefly say that any other recapture, there is bishop takes f6, winning material. Queen takes it's a pin, king takes it's a pin. So rook takes is needed. Rook to e6. So now doubling. Okay. a6. And the difference now being the black rook defends e7, and white has um, yeah, and white has doubled after the moves rook to e1 here. Okay, so queen takes b5. This is obviously the point. Takes, and then takes on f6. So white doesn't really lose material. Obviously, this was all pre-planned. Rook here. And white has a very nice position and went on to win in good style. Let's take a
check,
look. Takes on d6. Very nice. And,
check,
okay, black, instead of suffering, being in the knot, just gave up the exchange. And,
check,
yeah, white goes on to win
check,
in nice style. Getting the pawn going. Rook to f4, very nice. And, yeah, very calculated. Very, calculated very nicely.
check,
And queen to c3, and black resigns as, yeah, there's no stalemate tricks because there's many pawns on the board, and the queen will do the job against the pawn. So this is just a matter of technique. Okay. Alright, that is it. For this video at least. I tried to make it as introductory and as simplistic as I could for a part 1. Tried my best to do that. I want to mention again that there's going to be links in the description. So if you have any like follow-up, or you want to look into what I looked at, or you want some more information on stuff, links in the description. This took quite some time to produce. First of all, finding, the, 10 games, doing some analysis on them, getting this all jotted down on paper for notes, then actually, filming and recording it, then editing it together, and then uploading it, and yeah, and to the point where you're seeing it now. Yeah, so I hope all the work shows. I hope you enjoyed it, of course, and yeah, look out for part 2 of the King's Gambit part of this series. It'll probably be a bit more specific in parts and bit more detailed maybe. And of course, look out for other different openings that I plan on covering in the future. So yeah, thanks for watching. Of course, again, if you know a person with a YouTube account who likes chess, maybe send them my way too. Send a little love, right? No, I'm totally kidding. But yeah, likes and feedback is appreciated. Um, Thanks again for watching. This is Dill's Gambit Live, or DGL, or Dill, or whatever you people want to call me. And yeah, thank you for watching once again. See you guys around. Peace.